Welcome to the wonderful world of Ghost Horse Hollow. I'm your host, Anne Severn Williamson, and this is My Family Book Nook. My Family Book Nook podcast is brought to you by the Owsley County Public Library in Booneville, Kentucky, and by Jackson Energy, a Touchstone energy cooperative, and by Ghost Horse Gifts, featuring the fine intaglio jewelry and gemstone sculpture of artisan Jack Williamson, on the web at www.etsy.com/shop/ghosthorse-gifts. My Family Book Nook features the saga of the MacKennon homesteaders 100 years in the future in the Appalachian wilderness. Listeners may wish to follow along in the fairy lore of Ghost Horse Hollow, available on Amazon Books and Kindle Readers, starting with Book 1, Turn of the Blade. My Family Book Nook also shares stories, myths, and legends from around the globe in support of world literacy, conservation, and cultural exchange. And now for our ongoing adventure from the fairy lore of Ghost Horse Hollow. We left off in Ghost Horse Hollow with Farmer Jake MacKennon has been invited that very evening to the dead oak tree by the Coyote King and by Tormac, the Autumn Fairy Prince, a tricky swordsman. He knows he must take with him a fairy translator, and that has got to be his 16-year-old daughter, Panther MacKennon. But Jake knows that his wife Hannah will not want their daughter to go to such a dangerous meeting. Chapter 2. A Terrible Decision. The farmer sheathed his knife carefully and hurried up the tumbling stream. It was dark, and he found himself wishing that he were not alone. With lengthy strides, Jake moved like a buck deer traveling at top speed. He hardly tipped a creek rock, so accurate was his balance on the balls of his feet. MacKennon headed for an enormous, crisply scented evergreen tree. Its dripping branches and textured bark reminded Jake of his forest ancestry. His father, Prince Elevar, had been a royal hemlock dryad with a passion for taking human form. The prince had fallen deeply in love with a beautiful horsewoman, Gabriella MacKennon, who bore 3 sons to the dryad father. Gabriella proudly gave each boy her own last name to keep her connection to Prince Elevar a secret. Jake was the second son of the magically forbidden marriage. Desperate to hide her children from the Judge Lore, keeper of the dark gates of time, Gabriella scattered her sons to 3 territories: the northern lakes, the eastern woodlands, and the southern seas. Jake grew up with the loggers and mountain farmers of the untamed woods. He also inherited his mother's passion for riding and training horses. Winton MacKennon, the eldest brother, became a master carpenter alongside the boat builders of the northern shores, and young Gabriel navigated a merchant vessel that sailed the turbulent Gulf. The 3 boys' only communication since childhood had consisted of brief, infrequent letters. They longed to see one another again, but travel across the remote territories was risky due to unpredictable storms and wandering rogues. Jake MacKennon always hesitated beside the giant hemlock to listen to the wisdom of the forest and to mourn the loss of his father. The Judge Lore had sentenced Prince Elevar to death for mingling so closely with a human. The dryad's tree had been burned, and the remaining stump uprooted from the ashen ground. Since that tragic day, so many fairy folk had fallen in love with wingless creatures, simply known as the 2-leggeds, that the Judge Lore had reluctantly altered his pronouncement. Love between a human and a magic forest dweller was still greatly discouraged, but no longer punishable by death. Prince Elevar and Gabriella had paid a great price to advance the law, for the horsewoman had also perished following a mysterious plunge over Triad Falls. MacKennon held still and deliberately slowed down his heart and lungs. A red-headed woodpecker hammered at a knothole in the canopy above. A gray squirrel scolded in response. Gradually, the farmer thought he heard angry voices coming from below the rushing stream. Perhaps it was Blinky Joe, the one-eyed possum, snarling at Three-Toe, the black bear. They were arguing about a cooking pot. Jake drew his fingers through his shoulder-length dark auburn hair and secured it with a strip of leather. The bear and the possum would have to settle their own dispute. These two forest critters were always trying to prove which one was the better hand at making a tasty stew. Jake knew there was no time for their petty rivalry. Tormac was on the warpath, and a terrible decision had to be made. The farmer climbed to the top of a steep mossy bank and rapidly made for Gravel Cart Road. Wet, crumbling leaves silenced his footfalls as he strode beneath the towering hardwood trees on either side of the winding lane. Sunbeams streaming through the hefty trunks broke the passing of his shadow like a rhythmic painting of light and dark. Jake remembered that the woodlands had returned to their original size and density after the time of great change. Large paper factories were no longer in operation. All the woodland folk were consequently flourishing, especially the fairies, who spent much of their time awakening and blessing the thriving trees. The fairies' long period of neglect and near extinction had come to a happy end. The magic folk delighted in the renewal of their power. They had divided into two clans, the Starlight Fairies, who specialized in protecting and nourishing living plants, and the Moonlight Fairies, who managed death and decay, necessary components of nature. Lord Accolon of the Glades and Lady Titrimia of the Glen were the Starlight Fairy King and Queen. They encouraged the growth of trees, vines, ferns, and flowers. Lord Thracerak of the Doomed and Lady Vipress of the Cauldron were the Moonlight Fairy King and Queen. Mushrooms, moss, roots, and thorns were their charges, which explained why the Moonlight Fairies were often seen near graves and tombs. Tolerant and shrewd, the MacKennons had made friends with both fairy clans. Only lately the Moonlight Fairies were mutating. They were becoming more horrid in appearance and more aggressive. Certain members of Thracerak's royal court were keeping to themselves in remote cemeteries and deserted farms. The Moonlight Lord had even allowed his proud ambassador, Mildinderbog, to establish trade agreements with several unsavory characters. One such dangerous trader was reported to be General Zhu Yi Drang. She was a ruthless warrior who ran slaves up and down the muddy Jagon River. Perhaps, like the Autumn Fairy Prince, the Moonlight Fairies had begun experimenting with forbidden brews. Clearly, their returning powers were too intoxicating for fairies from both clans to control. The survivors in Ghost Horse Hollow had better look sharp, Jake mused to himself as he hurried along. His thoughts centered on encouraging the homesteaders to rely on their true allies, like the honest animals and the light-hearted magic folk. MacKennon's household light fairy, Sir Phineas Glowgold, quickly came to mind. He was an ancient soul, full of wisdom, though a bit of a know-it-all. With a sense of relief, the farmer reached the stretch of gravel cart road which wound slowly uphill toward what had once been a large tobacco barn. Only a few bundles of the brown leaves remained hanging inside the wooden structure from rickety tiers, like shriveling musty fingers. The remainder of Jake's annual crop had already been removed from their drying sticks. Hundreds of these bluntly pointed stakes, some 4 feet in length, lay stacked in an open, dry stall awaiting next year's harvest. The barn's faded red paint had peeled completely away in several places, and the door hinges squeaked with age. Inside the 3-story barn, a maze of poles and rafters intersected to support its high-pitched, rusty tin roof. After the time of great change, with its devastating storms and polar shifts, Jake had elected to fill the barn with dried sunflowers and corn for his stock animals instead of tobacco. Food was precious, and electricity a forgotten luxury. All modern communication and transportation devices were no longer a part of daily life. Many of their farm products, like rope and clothing, were made from durable hemp fibers. The MacKennons knew that storing crops for personal use was imperative, since farmers were isolated and less mobile. Fossil fuels were a thing of the past. Humans lucky enough to survive Earth's troubled transitions had reverted to working with horses, harnesses, and simple hand tools. Consequently, the storage barn also housed several old-fashioned wagons. One flatbed hay hauler was parked in a corner, piled high with neatly split logs and bundles of kindling. At present, the sound of 2 men splitting firewood could be heard coming from the far side of the barn. The surrounding hills echoed with the pounding blows of the workers' hickory-handled axes. Powerful thumps reverberated 2 or 3 times across the nearby duck pond, while a mellow baritone voice could be heard chanting a work cadence to ease the men's hard labor. When the sun don't shine and the rain falls down, dig a little deeper in the well. When the world seems dark and you wear a frown, dig a little deeper in the well. Dig a little deeper in the well, boys. Dig a little deeper in the well. Dig a little deeper in the well, boys. Dig a little deeper in the well. This part of my Family Book Nook podcast is dedicated to world conservation. Everyone can make a difference by restoring the world's forests, conserving energy, recycling, developing and sharing green technologies, farming organically, preserving wilderness, and protecting our pollinators. To live in harmony with the earth is to respect the sacred hoop of life. And now our adventure continues. The farmer walked around the corner of the barn to witness 2 sizable fellows in mid-swing, standing 12 feet apart. They were steadily reducing a large pile of oak logs to handy sticks of firewood, which were destined to feed several cast-iron stoves and stone hearths in the nearby farm buildings. More logs lay ready for use along the barn's outer walls, protected by the overhanging tin roof. The homesteaders consumed many loads of firewood in the winter, so Jake had decided to recycle the dead trees in the woodlands. There were plenty of fallen logs to choose from, due to the occasional raging thunderstorm. The earth's weather was improving, but had yet to return to normal. By harvesting the trunks on the ground, the dryad's son avoided offending any of his living relatives. "Evening, boys," the farmer called to his men. "Fine batch of wood you've got stacked there." As the primary caretaker of Ghost Horse Hollow, Jake praised every individual for his or her contribution to the upkeep of the place. His friends, Aaron Ray and Jonas White Hand, paused to wipe their brows. They scooped water into their cupped hands from a metal spigot before continuing their unofficial contest. Water droplets mixed with salty sweat dripped down their chins. These muscled farm hands would be hard-pressed to finish a second load of wood before Lady MacKennon rang the dinner bell. Jake leaned his walking stick against the side of the barn, removed his outer jacket, and grabbed a third axe. As he turned his shoulders to a rough log, the farmer realized that he would have to apply himself if he wanted to keep up with these 2 stout companions. To MacKennon's right stood Aaron Ray, whose chest was as round as the water barrel itself. At 6'6", Aaron was a formidable opponent in a fist fight or country brawl. Jake had found him, barely alive, washed up on the bleak southern shores of the muddy Jagon. With his short-clipped hair, MacKennon had rightly guessed that Aaron Ray had been a leader in some sort of military gang in the ruined city on the far side of the river. He certainly had the scars to prove it. Aaron's ancestors had once been slaves on rich plantations in the Caribbean islands, long, long ago. The strong man walked tall, never forgetting his costly heritage. Consequently, he could not abide prejudice or cruelty of any sort. The MacKennons had taken Aaron in as a member of their close family, and had encouraged the fugitive to learn a highly respectable trade. Over time, Aaron had become invaluable to the homesteaders, because an inventive metal worker was nearly impossible to replace after the time of great change. "It's about time you showed up for work," Aaron smiled. "I heard your awful singing down by the creek, and had to come put an end to it. You're going to kill those 2 dogs of yours with that ruckus?" Jake countered with a grin. MacKennon knew full well that it was Aaron who had fashioned the work song. He was very fond of making up tunes and playing a battered 12-string guitar most evenings on the front porch. The metal worker was accustomed to charming all the ladies with his sweet melodies and lively dance tunes. Aaron Ray could make donkeys bray and dogs howl right along with his music, particularly his 2 large blue-tick hounds, Bugle and Bell. The dogs, ever at Aaron's side, slouched against the tobacco barn in the lingering light, watching the kindling fall from the stumps with their chocolate-colored eyes. To MacKennon's left, an equally tall man applied his strength to the task of splitting wood. Jonas White Hand's axe sliced through a massive oak log like a table knife cutting through butter. His rhythmic swings resembled those of a warrior beating a drum, for Jonas was of native descent. He wore elk-hide clothing and sliced bone buttons, which he had fashioned himself. His double-bladed knife was handcrafted as well, from fine river flint. It had a rugged, deer-antler handle. What Jake appreciated the most about Jonas was his honesty. Though White Hand spoke very quietly, the sinewy man was not shy. He simply preferred to listen. His silence made some folks uneasy. Jonas was comfortable with himself, and that state of mind was all that concerned the native warrior. Unlike Aaron Ray, dogs did not choose to follow White Hand about the farm or into the woods. Jonas hunted alone. Occasionally, a black wolf with yellow eyes would visit him like a whisper out of the forest. White Hand referred to Night Wolf as his teacher. Her enormous paw prints were unmistakable in the frosts of late March, when she made her early spring appearance beneath the willows of Crescent Moon Lake. Night Wolf never wore a collar. She was a free spirit, as wild as the wind. "Rest a spell, I'll take it from here," MacKennon offered. "Just getting started," White Hand protested as he joined the fun. "You are too skinny and weak, like a sapling. Listen, old man, you better let Jake have a go at it." Aaron Ray taunted Jonas, never missing a swing. Him? Let the plowman try to match my pace. I am younger than I look. The years have been unkind." Actually, the other men thought that White Hand appeared much younger than his 55 years. Only his hands, tough as leather, indicated his many decades of service to others and his hard-earned wisdom. Outdoor living and a clear conscience had blessed the native warrior with ageless form. His inner strength he attributed to the creature teachers, and his devotion to walking a good pathway in life. Jonas wore 2 red-tailed hawk feathers in his thick black braid, which dropped to his waist, as a reminder to himself to stay on what he called the good red road. The feathers had been a gift from Night Wolf. They represented both male and female instincts, held in perfect balance, since the feathers had been shed from the left and right wings of a noble bird. "Watch this axe fly," MacKennon played along as he set up his first hunk of wood on the stump. "Shawunk!" Jake hacked the log clean in 2. Looking over his shoulder, The farmer noticed his friend's eyes filled with laughter. White Hand leaned his weight into his next blow, and the chunk of oak before him divided neatly into 4 sticks of firewood. Jonas silently tapped a small doeskin pouch hanging at the base of his throat, reminding Jake that true power came from a man's connection to all things. "I'm just warming up," the farmer protested, recalling the first and only time he had glimpsed the sacred objects in White Hand's medicine bag. Jake had given Jonas an eagle talon that he had found on a rocky ledge on the side of Grandfather Mountain. The farmer remembered that the 2 friends had been deer hunting on a cool October morning several years back. White Hand had briefly removed his medicine bag to add the eagle claw to its contents. A scrap of buffalo hide, a wolf tooth, and a piece of torn red cloth, as well as tobacco and sage, briefly appeared in White Hand's outstretched palm. There were other items, but MacKennon knew better than to pry into Jonas's spiritual path. Jake had tremendous respect for the native warrior, for White Hand was not only the finest tracker and bow hunter in all the fairylands, but was also Jake's closest adviser. With a few more swings of his axe, the plowman decided to break the news. "Gentlemen, the Coyote King has summoned me to the dead oak tree this very evening." Jake drew in a deep breath and held it. "I dare not refuse. Tormac will be there." MacKennon exhaled slowly and waited. "The Coyote King brings trouble to all. He should be playing tricks and making us laugh at ourselves, so that harmony might be shared. Instead, this leader is greedy, like a hungry termite. He takes more than his share of the kill." White Hand responded with his eyes on Jake. The 3 men sank their axes into the logs before them as the wind swiveled past the black walnut tree under which they all stood. Gnarled, bare branches rattled and clawed at the darkening sky, while a mass of decaying leaves, rotten walnut husks, and bits of bark swirled up from the ground. Bending down on one knee, White Hand read the scattered omen. "One day soon, the Coyote pack will turn against their king," Jonas warned. "Jake, you're gonna need us tonight," Aaron Ray commented. The big man sat down on his chopping stump and placed his axe across his knees. He proceeded to casually roll the long handle back and forth, toying with the sharp blade as it reflected the sunset's brilliant light. Aaron waited patiently for MacKennon to speak again. "I won't ask either of you to risk your life for me," the farmer returned. "I'll be taking Panther. She can handle Tormac, and she can understand his strange speech." Jake looked down at his boots. He was not sure how this decision would go over on the farm. Everyone loved his daughter. She was like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, or perhaps the rainbow itself, always bringing hope to any situation. No one would care to see her in any danger. Still, she was the only one in Ghost Horse Hollow who could speak, read, and write ancient fairy scroll. Like her mother before her, Panther MacKennon had agreed to complete a 7-year apprenticeship with Lady Titrimia, the Starlight Fairy Queen. Hannah's childhood studies, unfortunately, had been interrupted by her disapproving family. Lady MacKennon had finished only 4 years of the rigorous training in the forest. Panther, however, had but 1 year to go before she graduated from Fairy Academy. Jake frowned, disappointed with himself for not being able to think of another option. His daughter was about to face Tormac, the most feared of all the Starlight Fairy offspring. The wily prince would be sure to use the ancient fairy scroll at the meeting tonight, just to confuse and annoy MacKennon. Again, Panther was the only member of the family who had the ability to translate their conversation. Go she must. "Then we will be there," Aaron said as he spun toward the farmer. "We won't let the 2 of you face that mangy fur-tail alone. Ain't that right, White Hand?" Jonas gave the farmer one of his piercing looks, like a falcon over a wheat field before it dives. Jake knew immediately that it was pointless to argue with his 2 allies. Besides, he welcomed their company and protection. "All right, but it'll be a bad job. Bring your axes," MacKennon concluded. White Hand hefted his chopping tool and threw it cleanly, end over end, toward the side of the barn. With a swift thunk, It cracked a long board from top to bottom. The Coyote King will hear the ancestors laughing in his ears before the dawn star rises, White Hand declared simply, as was his custom. Ding-a-ding-ding-ding! The iron dinner bell rang across the late November fields and neatly tended gardens, calling the workers to their evening meal. The three men rinsed their hands in the cold water from the spigot before heading to the farmhouse on the next hill across from the old barn. Jake wondered how he was going to tell his wife about taking their slender daughter to face Tormac. Somehow, Hannah must be persuaded to let Panther go. The future of Ghost Horse Hollow, indeed the very lives of the homesteaders, hung upon her decision. Thank you for listening to my Family Book Nook podcast. Subscribe to our blog at myfamilybooknook.blogspot.com and follow us on Facebook, Pinterest, and YouTube at Ghost Horse Hollow and Ghost Horse Gift Gallery. To advertise with my Family Book Nook, contact Podbean's Pod Ads program for more information. Join us each Sunday afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern Time USA for another episode in the exciting saga of the MacKennon homesteaders, as well as stories from around the globe. Podbean.com podcasts are available through a convenient app on your PC, tablet, or cell phone. Listen anytime. We appreciate your sharing my Family Book Nook episodes with your friends and family on social media. Watch it grow. Special thanks to the lovely Price Sisters on the web at thepricesisters.com for our closing music. Follow me on Instagram, Ann_ghost_horse. This is Ann Severn Williamson, and it's been a pleasure